I started dating my ex-wife. And she also was sort of what I would call people who are spiritual, but not, they'll say I'm spiritual, but not religious. About 2 years into the marriage, she brought up the idea of having children. We agreed to have children. She chose James and started trying to turn him into a girl while we were still married.
We just need to realize that whether it's in preschool or kindergarten, first grade, these kids, and well beyond that, they are not in any way, shape, or form prepared to handle these kinds of questions, this kind of insinuation.
The entire Greek Orthodox Church where I was going, it turned against me, took her side. They let my son even dance as a girl in the Greek festival.
This idea that if you have any same-sex attraction, then what you should be doing is identifying as gay.
This was very disturbing to me. It shook my faith to the absolute core.
We've really shifted into a terribly unhealthy dependency on therapy and medication.
Eventually, I realized that I had been taking my son to school in boys' clothes, and the teacher was giving him a dress, and the school was having him use the girls' restroom behind my back without informing me.
It perfectly corresponds to the garbage already that's being discovered.
It's legal in all 50 states for schools to transition children behind the parents' back.
I love being a man. I mean, I hated that when I was young. I feel like I fill it out, and there's, God works through my masculine soul and frame.
The transgender movement was founded and funded initially by Republicans, not Democrats.
Well, hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Whether you tune in through Love and Truth Network directly or through Transforming Congregations, we are so glad that you're here for this really important episode. I'm really grateful and honored to have Jeff Younger with us for this episode, and looking forward to you hearing from him. Jeff is going to be sharing some of his own faith journey story, but then some of you may be aware that his name may sound familiar because there's been a lot out there on social media. Frankly, there should be more out there in terms of what has been going on in his family situation with his son over the last number of months, maybe year or two even. And so Jeff is going to just open up and share with us again a little bit about his own story. We'll do some dialogue around that, but really the other story we want to get into is what's been going on with his family. So Jeff, thanks so much for jumping in here and joining us on this episode.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we would love to hear just whether it's 10, 15 minutes or whatever of your personal story of coming to faith and what life was like a little bit before then and that kind of thing.
Well, I was raised a Baptist.
Me too.
But, going out into the world, I grew up in the 80s during like the punk rock scene. And the anarchy scene and all that stuff. And for most of my life, I was an atheist. Yeah. And God forgive me, I know that my persuasive abilities were used to turn many people away from the church. I know that for a fact. So I'll be held to account for that undoubtedly. When I got past 9/11, about 2004, I got a letter from the United States Marine Corps saying that I was going to lose all my education benefits because there's a time limit on the new GI Bill, which I didn't know that there was a time limit. I thought, when I retire at 60, I'll go to college or something, because I never went to college because I was making over $200K a year in my 20s and the 80s.
Wow.
I came out from the Marine Corps with very marketable technology skills.
Wow.
So I never went to college. It would have been silly for me to actually go to college. So
Charlie Kirk would agree with you, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I had a business in Hong Kong, and I got this communication, and my father had 2 heart attacks, and he lived in Dallas, Texas. And so I moved back to Dallas, Texas, because nobody in my family would take care of him. So I took care of him until he passed away. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I looked around since I was sort of trapped in Dallas for a school, and I found a liberal arts school. And I chose it because I wanted to study mathematics, and they had 2 logicians on staff. And you'd be hard pressed to find a single logician at even some of the best universities in America. So I just was there at a very auspicious timing for me. So I studied philosophy and mathematics there. And the school is called the University of Dallas. And it's a Catholic university. And you have to do a semester in Rome. So I had to go to Rome and, you get the Vatican tour and all this stuff. And I remember standing in the Vatican, and one of the professor emeritus there who took a shining to me, because basically they treated me like professors because I was like 35 amongst all these 18-year-olds. Yeah. And so he said, well, so you've been going to the University of Dallas for a while. We're a Catholic university. Here you are in the Vatican. What do you think about the Vatican? What do you see? And I said, well, I see an immense monument to Christ built on the backs of German war widows who were paying penitences to get their husbands out of purgatory. And it humbled him a little bit. And he said, that's actually how it was built. And he said, well, are you going to convert to Catholicism? And I said, well, you've convinced me of the sacramental nature of the church. I buy into apostolic succession, buy into all these things, but I don't buy into the idea of created grace or papal infallibility. I don't even buy into papal supremacy. And I said, I've read the canons of the councils and it's not there. And he said, well, you know what? Just go be Orthodox, because that's what you are anyway. And so I didn't even know what Orthodoxy really was. So
right.
I found a Greek Orthodox church and became Greek Orthodox. About a year after I converted, I started dating my ex-wife. And she also was sort of what I would call people who are spiritual, but not, they'll say I'm spiritual, but not religious.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Almost a little new agey to it, So when we decided to get married, I told her, I cannot marry you outside of a Christian marriage. And, I'm Orthodox. We're going to have to get married in an Orthodox church. We're going to have to. So the whole family converted, and, we went into the church. Then about 2 years into the marriage, she brought up the idea of having children. We agreed to have children. Then 2 years after she had children, my children are 2 years old, 2.5 years old.
Twins?
Twin boys.
Okay.
Yep. The oldest one is James. The youngest one is Jude by 5 minutes. I named them after the brothers of Jesus. And she chose James and started trying to turn him into a girl while we were still married. And so obviously I said, well, we need to go talk to the priest about this. We need to get get the boy's godparent involved. It's their responsibility, the spiritual education of the child. The entire Greek Orthodox Church where I was going, it's St. John the Baptist Greek Orthodox Church in Euless, Texas, turned against me, took her side. They let my son even dance as a girl in the Greek festival.
Wow. What year was that, Jeff?
This is 11 years ago. So what are we talking about? 2010?
Yeah. So
this was very disturbing to me. It shook my faith to the absolute core. So they eventually basically hired a policeman to follow me around so that I wouldn't get anywhere near my children during the services. And kind of just drove me completely out of the parish. So I wound up going to an Antiochian Orthodox church, which is near me. And then we went into this massive legal battle. A custody evaluator lied to the court, and in his report said that my ex-wife was not trying to transition my son to a girl. He lied. And he said that I had made a false accusation. And on that basis, the court gave me less than standard possession time with my son.
And so he knew from her that she was actually, and from you obviously, but he knew that she was actually in the process of
Yes.
attempting to transition him.
And I showed him video.
Okay.
You know, your listeners can go out to YouTube and search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl." That's the first iPhone video I ever took, and it's my son telling me that his mom is teaching him that he's a girl, and he believes it. It went viral because, especially people in Eastern Europe who are Orthodox, have this vision of Texas as kind of a highly religious Bible Belt state.
Well, I think the other states feel the same way about
Yes,
Texas. Yeah,
you're right. And so they just could not understand how this could happen in Texas. Like, it just didn't make sense to them. So it just went viral worldwide. So you can go find that video. That's the video I showed him. And he lied to the court. So I got basically 7 days a month with my kids, you know? Well, after the divorce, she ramps up this transition. She socially transitions him and starts presenting him to the world as a girl. Eventually, I realized that I had been taking my son to school in boys' clothes, and the teacher was giving him a dress, and the school was having him use the girls' restroom behind my back without informing me.
Well, and Jeff, again, I just want to, I know I've already asked this question, but I just want to kind of highlight this and underscore it. So at this point, so you said about 11 years ago, so in 2013, 2014, right. And so when all of this is going on, when this began, it sounds like he was around 2. And then it's progressing, obviously, if he's in, I don't know if it's preschool or regular school, but so he's what, 3, 4, 5 right now in this time frame?
At this time frame, he's in first grade. He's
in first grade, okay.
First and second grade is when they did this.
But it began back when he was 2.
Yes, that's right. In fact, the video that you find on YouTube is my son just past his 3rd birthday.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. So again, just for those listening to this, the idea that a 2-year-old is that someone is attempting to convince a 2-year-old that they are the wrong sex, the wrong gender, whatever, and feeding that and pouring that into him. Of course, what we know is that this happens in a number of schools, not every public school, obviously, but that ideology has been out there for a while and was just growing. I think we're seeing some hitting the brakes of that now, thankfully, very much so. But it's still out there, and kids, we just need to realize that whether it's in preschool or kindergarten, first grade, these kids, and well beyond that, they are not in any way, shape, or form prepared to handle these kinds of questions, this kind of insinuation that it's even possible for them to be the wrong sex of some kind. So anyway, I just, again, want to just underscore just how young your son was when it began, and when it's kind of ramping up, still how young he was. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead and jump in.
No, that's right. And one important thing for your audience to know is that it's legal in all 50 states for schools to transition children behind the parent's back. And we can talk about the legal reasons why, later on. And that was very shocking to me because I went through the entire grievance process with the school and tried to go to court, but there's no basis. It's perfectly legal.
Well, I do want to come back to that. I'm just jotting that down right now. I want to come back to that because a lot of people, including myself, believe that California and there's Illinois, I think, and there's a handful of other states, maybe Minnesota, that actually, I think they've put additional laws on the books that can emancipate children from their parents and those kinds of things. But we oftentimes think, oh, those are the states that are doing this kind of thing. But so I just want to spend some more time on that. We can come back to that though a little bit later.
Definitely. So that ramping up that she did led to another trial that happened in 2019. So we had a trial in 2017 for the divorce. Then we had a trial in 2019. At that 2019 trial, the issue of transitioning James to a girl was the prime issue in the trial, whereas they had lied before. We got the top experts really in transgender medicine on both sides of the issue. We had Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who runs the largest gender clinic in America in LA County, who's now my son's physician, came in, was an expert witness. I brought in Dr. Levine, who started the first transgender clinic in America in 1974.
Out of Johns Hopkins?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And Levine, they shut their clinic down after 4 years because the data showed very clearly that it was harming patients.
It was Paul McHugh that really shut that down, right? Back in the day.
That's correct. Yeah. And Levine was the one who held the grants, and he's the one who got the NIH to cancel them, And so he was an expert witness, and he just destroyed the other side. There was a deposition that I conducted where I asked their expert, Johanna Olsen Kennedy, one question. And this question caused them to not use her at trial. I asked her this simple question: what is your medical justification for amputating healthy body parts from children? And her answer was, if the body parts are causing psychological distress, they're not healthy. The lawyer sitting next to me was a woman, opposing counsel. She threw her pen on the floor. She didn't drop it. She threw her pen on the floor, walked out, and withdrew from the case.
Huh.
She couldn't stomach it. And so we got a new counsel. So we go to trial. I win the case. I get 50-50 custody, no child support. But most importantly, the judge gave me exactly what I asked for: a check on all medical procedures, so I could stop these things.
Mm-hmm.
During this time, from 2017, after the 2019 trial, up to about 2021, I had been spending a lot of money. I spent about $160,000 of my own money and lobbied the Texas legislature and got these practices made illegal in Texas. I wrote the bill, but they took 3 key sentences out of the bill. And those 3 sentences would have classified these procedures as felony child sexual abuse, which in Texas is life in prison. This session, we're actually going to make it a death offense. So that would have prevented my son from traveling to California if those 3 sentences had been in there. And those 3 sentences were removed by Republicans in the Texas House.
Yep.
And some of the things that I found out about how this works in the Republican Party, we can talk about. And so you might want to write this down. The transgender movement was founded and funded initially by Republicans, not Democrats. And that is a shocking fact that I discovered.
Yep.
And I'll point you to some online resources as well where you can prove that, because many of your listeners are not going to believe that.
Right.
So I fought with, and I got into, it's a 6-year battle. I fought with the legislature and the governor. I made them sign that bill. They did not even want to have a bill, but I made them do it. At one point, they were getting so many phone calls on my bill that we were shutting their phones down. They had to spend $250,000 to buy a new phone trunk.
So what you were doing in terms of the way that you made them do that is you were raising public awareness, and they were getting blown out of the water in terms of just
Completely. And what Republicans have been very good at is raising awareness. But what I did was quite different. I raised awareness, but I also organized.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a page out of the Democrat playbook, because during that period, I also ran for office, because they wouldn't pass my bill. So I said, well, then I'll go into the House and I'll introduce it myself. And so I ran for office. Before I did that, I actually went to a Democrat organizing meeting in Dallas County and told them that I was a Republican, but I was becoming a Democrat because I'd become a liberal. And I walked up to this, just to give you the difference, but you go to a Republican club and you have a charismatic speaker, and then you have a cocktail soiree. That's what they are every time you go to a Republican club. I go to this Democrat club. First of all, it was in the middle of the day, which I thought was odd. I went in a suit like I would in a Republican club. That was a mistake. But I show up at this gymnasium. I didn't know it was a gymnasium. There's a bunch of ladies at these tables with this kind of short lesbian hair that Democrat women wear. And they say, well, you want to become a Democrat? That's great. We're always trying to do this. What topic is most interesting to you that converted you to the Democratic Party? And I said, the transgender issue. And they gave me a card and said, go to table 6. I was like, this isn't like a Republican club. So I go to table 6, and there's these like purple-haired lesbians there. And they just give me an entire game plan for how to take over my local precinct, how to become the precinct chair in the Republican Party, to subvert the Republican process, how to organize people for protests, how to put pressure. They gave me a whole manual. They said they would give me a website for free. If I get 50 people in the precinct to sign up, if I get 100 people to sign up, they could get me some budget so that we could have events. Like they were just like totally organized. So I copied all that. And I went into the rural counties of Texas. We got counties in Texas that only have 1,000 people in them.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can get 200 votes in a county like that, I can flip a House seat.
Right.
Right. So I went into those counties and told them what was going on. And we had conversations like this. The sheriff rolls up to the back and says, everybody go back inside. This is a political issue. Don't get your guns. Like that's the kind of conversations we had in some of these rural counties. So these people absolutely organized like crazy. And I created actually a private social media server so they could communicate privately where Facebook and other liberal groups couldn't data mine what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they had no notice of what was happening. At one point, the Speaker of the House in Texas was logging over 300 people a day lobbying for my bill. So they passed it. Here's the shocking fact. He's the largest donor to the Republican Party. He's a hedge fund billionaire. Founded the transgender movement. Funded it and founded it out of the Human Rights Campaign. Have you seen like the yellow equal sign, the gay rights?
Sure.
That's a Republican.
Okay.
That's his foundation. His son actually runs it. All of the scores, the corporate scores that are used, to determine if you're being fair to gay people, hiring enough gay people.
Right.
Okay. He's also the largest out-of-state donor in Texas and Florida. So he controls the Republican establishment. Here's the fundamental quandary of an elected official if you're a Republican. You win elections by paid voter outreach. That's just the unpleasant fact of Republican democracy in America. You think it's because you have a great message or whatever, but actually you win by paid voter outreach. If you can't do paid voter outreach, you simply won't beat your opponent, even if they're a liberal.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have a lot of money to do that. Even in small races, it takes a lot of money. So you're going to need donor money. And so you have to please those donors. On the other hand, if you're in a place like Texas, you have a pretty conservative, I would almost say really a right-wing electorate here in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you split the difference there? And here's how they do it. They pass bills that appear conservative but have loopholes, arcane legal loopholes in them. Right?
Got it.
So I'll give you an example that's not the transgender. I gave you the one about they pulled those 3 sentences.
By the way, did they give you any indication as to why they did that? Because that fits right into what you're talking about.
No, absolutely not. And they told everybody how conservative they were. They outlawed something with no criminal penalties. Okay. And they do this a lot. They do this constantly in all the states. Republicans do this all the time.
So it looks good. They're satisfying their constituents, but in the end, people can do pretty much what they want to because there's,
You just fly your kids up to Colorado and just have their testicles removed and bring them back to Texas. But if it's felony child sexual abuse, you can't take your kid out of the country or out of the state, abuse them, and come back. When you come back, we're going to put you in a hole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that would have disallowed them from doing that. So what they did is they came to the Texas electorate and said, see how conservative we are. We outlawed these transgender procedures. And they went to their donors and said, hey, I left those loopholes. So, we're still covered. You can give me money. They did the same thing with abortion here. A lot of people think Texas outlawed abortion. We haven't stopped a single abortion in Texas. Planned Parenthood makes way more money than they did per abortion. The margins are much higher because they don't have to keep hospitals, emergency rooms on site. They did the same thing there. So there's a loophole which allows them to administer, essentially they administer oral poisons to kill the fetus. And they do that in a kind of a legal way they have a transfer procedure that's technically legal. And women just go into Planned Parenthood, they kill their babies, and Planned Parenthood gets the same amount of money for aftercare, but they don't have to maintain an emergency room. So they make lots more money. They do this on all issues. The border in Texas, border in Arizona, same thing.
Yeah.
They'll say we're closing the border, but there's always these loopholes, so they still keep coming over, right? It's how it works. So the donor, what you realize after doing this for a while is there's one donor class in the country, and they run both parties. And so what you're really seeing in politics is kind of like pro wrestling. the outcome is fixed and scripted by the people that paid for the event. It's just being done for your entertainment to make you participate and spend your energy in the wrong places. So,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
One of the ways that I was able to get my bill passed is I stopped lobbying legislatures and started lobbying donors. And so that's what did it. And I actually went to their churches and asked them in front of their congregation, like, are you going to support this? You have relationships. You're donating to this candidate. Can you make a phone call? Right in front of their church. Mm-hmm. And they did. And that's why the bill passed.
Well, and that's what I want to kind of bring this back to, and then we can fan out from there a little bit. But I'm wondering, for those listening, for my own benefit, I am wanting to get a sense of, obviously you've been swimming in these waters in the most personal way possible for a long time. Yeah. And so the first thing I want to ask you, and then I'll follow up with part B, is the things that you know now, and because you've experienced them, they've been shot. Well, I'm assuming they have. Did these things kind of floor you? I mean, did you think it was something that things were different? What's that?
I mean, it blew me away.
Okay.
It challenged to the core everything I had ever believed about my country. And remember, I've been in the Marine Corps. Like, I believe in my country.
Yep.
I'm a patriot, and it challenged to the core. What I actually came to understand from this is that we essentially have not been ruled by the Constitution for at least 100 years. That we were essentially taken over by a giant bureaucracy under FDR, basically. It really started under Wilson, but and you could argue there was some hintings of it during the Gilded Age in the late 1800s. But we've been really run by bureaucracies and administrations and agencies. We've not been ruled by our elected officials. In fact, in all the states they do this, and the federal Congress they do this, they delegate to agencies rulemaking authority. If you think about what that means, is they're delegating the right to make laws to unelected people.
Yep.
And there's no way to challenge them. You can't really, when like the Health and Human Services was promoting transgenderism in Texas, there's this like 15-year legal process I have to go through before I can get to a court. I have to go through their administrative legal process.
Yeah.
Right, within their administration before I can ever get to a court with a jury. And most people just can't do that. And plus it slows everything down. It's like 10, 15 years to do this. Right. So what it made me realize is that the enemies of Christianity took over these bastions of power in the government, not just in the schools. We think of the schools a lot, but
it's true. It's true that it's there, but it's also far more expansive.
Yeah. It's actually the control of education is an artifact of the control of the bureaucratic state.
Yeah, right.
The Department of Education in every state is controlled. You can't. I went into a math education program to get an education certification because we had a shortage of math teachers in Texas. And I thought, I'll just teach for free, just as charity, So I had to go do like this math master's program. It was really easy. It wasn't really math. It was more like education stuff. But they kept requiring me to sign these papers, which were objectively scientifically false. And these pledges that you have to sign are basically, are you a liberal test? It's a test. Are you a liberal? Are you a leftist? And I couldn't sign them. They were against my Christian faith in many cases. And so they stopped letting me take classes. So you can't get an education major unless you're a leftist. The whole curriculum has been designed by the bureaucracy to prevent conservatives from coming into the system. The same thing is true in the small business loans. That's true in the health and human services and how they dole out health care. Welfare systems are all done that way. Business licensing is all done this way. So they control these levers of power in your everyday life, and you don't realize it. And I didn't realize it until I started having to deal with these counselors, Like, I've got this counselor teaching my son that he's a girl, a court-appointed counselor. So I go, well, let me go to the counseling governing body, the Texas Psychological Association. And they're all leftists, and they're telling me I'm crazy and a bigot. I couldn't believe it, And so this is one of the things that's very encouraging about the Trump administration. They seem to understand that the center of gravity of the anti-Christian administrative state is in the agencies.
Well, for sure. I mean, it seems that way. I was just going to say a moment ago that everything that you're talking about, I think to even to people who are probably, quite conservative listening to this podcast and these kinds of topics, I would imagine that even a number of them might feel like, come on, Jeff, this really, talk about conspiracy theories. I mean, it seems like you're really unpacking some stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it perfectly corresponds to what is being uncovered in just 30 days or 31 days or whatever it's been. It perfectly corresponds to the garbage already that's being discovered through Doge and their work. So certainly. So the other thing, though, I wanted to come back to is how are you familiar with Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale?
Yes.
Okay. And so I really appreciated that book, and I appreciated her stance and her work on that. There's a number of others in that kind of same vein. I feel like that's so important. I appreciate what Abigail Schreier is writing about, obviously with regard to irreversible damage in terms of rapid onset gender dysphoria amongst girls and that whole conundrum. But then the next book that came out, I think it was her next one, is Bad Therapy, and how she's talking about, I think even some of the things you're talking about has its tentacles into basically dumping therapy and labeling children at the earliest of ages and getting them on medication that they don't. I believe that there is a role for medication. I believe there's a role for, my wife's a licensed counselor. I believe there's a role for counseling, but this ridiculous over therapizing of our children and everybody else. Another book came out, I can't remember now, quite a few years ago. I don't even remember who wrote it, but the title has always stuck with me, One Nation Under Therapy. And I just feel like we've really shifted into terribly unhealthy dependency on therapy and medications that don't seem to be producing the desired outcome that you would think they'd be producing. We're more anxious, we're more depressed, more suicidal. I mean, all the things are off the charts, and yet there's more counseling available than ever. So but I feel like there's a huge role that the church needs to play. I mean, at the end of the day, Donald Trump is not our savior. No. Elon Musk is not none of these things are going to save us. I'm grateful for the way that the brakes are getting hit, for the simple acknowledgement of the basic understanding that there's a man, that there are men and women, period. There's two sexes, and gender is the same thing as sex. I mean, all of that is so clarifying. It's sad that we have to clarify it, but it is. But ultimately, I want to come back to where's the role of the church in this? Where's the role of people who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ in so many of the aspects of what's going on in our culture, and certainly what you've been experiencing? And you've said, hey, the progressive church comes out in droves to say, yeah, let's trans children and do all this stuff. Let's cut off healthy body parts and all of that. But you weren't getting anyone, I don't know about now, but you weren't getting anyone from conservative, Bible-believing Orthodox churches to come and stand with you on these issues. Can you just kind of speak to that a little bit more? And what is your perspective on the role of the church in these cultural issues?
So I've written a number of articles on this, and I'm glad you're getting into this. Most of my interviews don't get into this. This is the fundamental problem. What Trump and these guys are dealing with are the laws. But what backs up the laws is something that in the Western tradition we have come to call the spirit of the laws. Mm-hmm. And the spirit of the laws is the spiritual basis for obedience to the laws, right?
Right.
And so we have to talk in terms of spiritual things when we talk about the spirit of the laws. I believe that in the 20th century, you could argue that it started a little bit earlier, maybe again in the late Gilded Age. There was a radical redefinition of the human person, and the Christian understanding of what a human person is was radically changed. Mm-hmm. let me illustrate this first from a story, and then I'll give you some explanation, and then I'll give you 2 book sources to go to.
Great.
I had an NBC producer who was trying to get access to interview me and my sons together, which I never let my sons go on camera like that. But he tried and tried. He actually flew down to Dallas and kind of courted me for a while, kind of pestered me, really. Eventually, he got me out to dinner on a Saturday evening. And he said, Jeff, you're a Christian. And I said, yeah, I'm Orthodox Christian. And he said, can I go to church with you tomorrow? And I said, sure, I'll pick you up from the hotel. Let's do, I usually do Orthros and then the liturgy, but I'll pick you up just for the liturgy. Wear comfortable shoes. We're Orthodox. We stand up a lot, that kind of stuff. And then, I think he was wearing a hidden recorder. I think he was trying to get me on, on a kind of a gotcha tape. And he said, but I'm gay. And I said, well, hey, we're all sinners, man. So you just do what we do. When the ecclesiastical day starts at sundown, do your best to refrain from all sins until after the church service. Like, just try for that period of time. It's like just half a day, try not to sin. I said, I'm going to try when I step out of the aisle and walk up to take communion. I'm going to try not to sin just from the walk from the pew to the chalice. I've never successfully done it. Like, it's hard not to sin, right? Just try not to sin. And he said, try not to sin. He said, but I'm gay. I couldn't be who I really am. And I said, well, that's the difference. I think your sexual activities are behaviors. They're not an identity. And so you think you're a biological computer who's been programmed to satisfy largely unconscious desires. And I think you're a soul, an embodied soul, that's worthy of infinite dignity. So why don't you and I have this conversation instead of talking about whether you're gay or not, because that's where a real disagreement lies. And the guy started crying.
Mm-hmm.
The guy started crying. That's the difference, actually, between the 2 divisions in this country. Everybody sort of understands it from a political dimension, and you can see it in policies. There's a definite difference. But the root cause of those differences is a fundamental difference in what they think a person is.
That's right.
And don't forget that Christianity introduced a unique vision of what a person is and changed the entire world by the introduction of this idea. And it came from the idea of the persons of the Trinity and Christ's perfect human nature. And so what you have, now let me switch gears, and this, I don't want to shock your listeners, but let me try to argue from the other side to give you, again, more insight into how they think.
Sure.
It's going to sound very perverse. It is perverse, but it's a benevolent way of presenting their position so that you can understand it. Imagine that you believe that the purpose of being a person is to express some innate identity that you have. And that society is really a kind of prison that keeps you from identifying as the kind of person you really want to be. And on top of all that, your sexual identity is the primary core of your personal identity. It's not a behavior. It's the core of your personal identity. So now you're looking upon a child. Say they're like my son, 3 years old. 3-year-old children don't have sexual identities. From their perspective, they see a child suffering in the world because it doesn't have a core identity. The child lacks a core identity. So they impose a sexual identity so the child can then express whatever they want from that core identity. And that's why they believe they're being benevolent when they do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk to these people, we'll talk about things like behavior, or we talk about identity. We talk about children are too young, or these things. And we're using the same words, but we don't mean the same thing by the words. So we're never really talking about the same thing.
Can you illustrate that a little bit? I mean, I think I often say that language has been co-opted, and but in this particular situation, can you just illustrate that?
Yeah. So think about it this way. Just think about it when somebody says, I'm gay.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that I have a permanent and immutable characteristic which causes me to have sex with people of the same sex, right? When we say a sexual orientation, we mean an attraction that may change over time
Mm-hmm.
and a voluntary behavior that you engage in that you can refrain from. It's called abstinence.
That's right.
That you can refrain from. It's perfectly within your volitional control. And they'll say, well, this is genetic. We know there's actually, I'm a working statistician. That's what I do for a living. I've looked at all of the research on this, and we can definitively say that homosexuality is not genetic.
Yeah, even Dr. Lisa Diamond admits that.
Yeah, it's not genetic. So does it have environmental influences? Absolutely. It's
Sure.
highly correlated with early childhood sexual abuse, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it definitely has environmental influences. But we also have prison studies which show that people's so-called sexual orientation changes. They go into prison for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're gay, and they come out and they become immediately heterosexual again. Right? So they're using it in a way that it's ontological. Gay is something that you are,
mm-hmm.
and we're using it in terms of behavior. It's something. So when we say homosexuality and they say homosexuality, we're not actually using the same terms. And so they think that we're making illogical arguments because you couldn't say we're talking about behaviors, and to them you say you can't say that about an identity.
Yeah.
And it sounds illogical. Both sides sound illogical, but it's fundamentally rooted in this what Truman calls. There's a good book called The Rise. Hang on a second. Let me make sure I get the title right so your people can find it. It's The Rise and Triumph of the Expressive Self by a guy named Truman. And he chronicles in the 20th century, especially, the rise of this new point of view about what the human person is. And he talks about its consequences in transgenderism, talking about issues of homosexuality, talking about even issues of criminality, right? Criminality has become an identity. If you come from certain neighborhoods and you were raised poor, criminality is such a part of your identity, they don't even punish you for it anymore.
Right. And it also puts you on, some kind of intersectionality chart that makes you a victim to the point that now we're going to actually reverse that on its head, and you're going to have privilege, to make up for what you didn't get. So
that's right.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to touch on a little bit, I don't know to what degree you may or may not know this, or it may be abundantly obvious, but this is also in the Christian world. One of the things that was really frustrating to me often is in listening to those who embrace like a pro-gay theology, Matthew Vines, Justin Lee as well, many others, even those that would embrace. There's side A and side B. The side A perspective is we can live into this. God blesses these unions. The side B side would say, no, this is our identity. This is hardcore. It's immutable. It isn't going to change, but I can't act on it. I know what the Bible, I can clearly see what it says about sexuality. But both camps really began pushing back and getting frustrated with people like me who believe that just what you said, Jeff, that we do not need to identify. I came out of homosexuality. You can see the name of my book over my shoulder, and that question that I dealt with as part of my upbringing and embraced at some point in my life. And God brought me through that and brought me out of that. Thankfully, I've been married to my wife for 17 years now and have two sons of our own. And so, by the power of God, right? But this pushback on this idea that if you have any same-sex attraction, then what you should be doing is identifying as gay. Like there was a huge push, and there still is, that, and I'm like, no, not at all. Why in the world would I identify by something that if I were to act on would be sin and doesn't lead me toward life? It leads me toward destruction. Yeah. And so I'm going to be very open, which the church rarely is open about our individual struggles. We need to be a lot more vulnerable about what we are actually wrestling with so we can find help and support and strength. But I'm not going to do what you're saying, which is this seductive alluring, but this really is who you are because you feel this way. It feels so inherent to you. And many Christians have either embraced that for themselves, or many Christian leaders and others have said, "Oh, but that's so nuanced. That's such a great approach to embrace." To bless them in their identity, but they just can't act on it, when actually that is the most frustrating way to live the rest of your life, believing you're something you can never act on.
Yeah, and it's not true. Fundamental, one of the simplest definitions of Christianity is just the search for truth.
Yeah.
And so an allegiance to what's true, should be what it is. The human nature as created by God does not always express itself perfectly as we were originally created, right? It doesn't express itself that way. But inside of every person, especially inside a Christian, there is an innate aspiration for that perfect human nature that the Holy Spirit gives you. The acorn wants to grow into the best and most the strongest and most flourishing oak tree that it possibly can be.
Yeah.
Its circumstances may not let it do that, right? But built into that little acorn is that kind of purpose to become that tree. All humans have that purpose to flourish through union with God and partake of Christ's perfect human nature. We all want that. We all strive for this. That is the natural state of man, is that striving, right? The unnatural, satanic and deceptive, Satan works by deception. Everybody thinks like,
right.
He's going to take over your body and make your hand hit you or hit somebody. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
He fools you even about yourself. He works mainly through deceiving you about yourself, right?
That's right.
And so this is a form of deception that keeps you from striving and sanctifying yourself to achieve union with God. And so it's frustrating personally, as you said, right? It's like you're having to you feel like you're having to refrain from something that's innate in you, right? But it's even worse. It's frustrating the Holy Spirit's attempt to regenerate you.
Yeah.
And sanctify you.
Right.
And people who are Christians and go to church just instinctively, innately understand that. And that in itself is a grave sin.
Certainly, absolutely is. And then again, coming back kind of full circle to what Megan Basham wrote about in Shepherds for Sale, that I often talk about the three different churches, and broadly speaking, and they're not perfect, but the ones that I kind of grew up in, maybe a little bit of what you grew up in, that very fundamentalist, very rules based. And I'm grateful for the truth that was poured in, but man, I sure would have liked to have had some equal measure of love and compassion and relational connection that really wasn't there a whole lot. But, there's a lot of those kind of churches that didn't want to deal with the mess of what my life later became, or what it even was pretty early on. And there's still plenty of those around, but I think it's fewer by percentage. But now the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that we have so many churches now that will bless and affirm, anything or many things when it comes to LGBTQ or sexual perversion and identity confusion and all of that, calling it good. And then there's a bunch of churches kind of in the midst, believing what's true, but not knowing how to actively. That's why our ministry exists, actually, is for those churches to help them understand how, not just in the LGBT space, but in the far bigger heterosexual brokenness space within the church, that we can actually help people find genuine freedom and genuine help and support to live out the calling that God has put on their lives. Each of us as believers have an eternal purpose and calling on our lives, and we are meant to live in a sense of belonging with one another. And so often we only experience a very tepid reality of those two things, this eternal calling and being able to partner with God in this amazing kind of way. And yet we're so wrapped up in all this garbage and confusion in the world, and it's made its way into the church as well. So bringing clarity to that, and speaking the scriptures over those issues
Mm-hmm.
and giving a way forward is really so much of what our ministry is even about and why we exist. But
that's great, because there's just not enough of this. Like one of the insights I had from just years of Bible reading in church is we have metaphors, we think in analogies. Even the way we read the Old Testament properly, we read the Old Testament from the lens of the New Testament. So the Old Testament, represents types of what's to come. It's the foreshadowing of the fulfillment. We don't read the Old Testament and then interpret the New Testament in terms of the Old Testament. We do it the other way around.
Yes.
So similarly, I think people do this in their own churches, in their own lives. I think the best analogy or metaphor that I have come across, at least for me, is the image of the church as a hospital rather than a court of law.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And it makes sense. Then the world makes a lot of sense actually after that, because you're like, okay, you expect to find sick people in hospitals.
Yeah.
That's not surprising. And not all medicines, even though you have two sick people with the same ailment, they don't necessarily respond the same way to the same medicines.
Mm-hmm.
People need different medicines for different times. And that's why we say in Orthodoxy, the dogmas of the church are medicines. But even the dogmas of the church can be harmful for some people.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be careful. There's an old saying from St. Ephrem which says, what is the truth? Whatever gets you to heaven. That's what it is.
Yeah. Because
what gets you to heaven has to be true. And this emphasis on, a kind of a rule following, how many years in purgatory, or an emphasis on church discipline. You hear this a lot, like a kind of church discipline, which is necessary.
Yep.
Which is definitely necessary. Mm-hmm. Some people, as Paul said, have to be turned over to Satan for the salvation of their soul. That's definitely true. But a lot of times people need these spiritual medicines. I'm going to give you an example. So I do agree with you. I think we should talk more about our struggles. And I think the practices of the early church of doing public confessions was just that. Mm-hmm. So here's one that I confessed some time ago. I was working in Austin, Texas, and I was working with a woman who I was very attracted to, just unreasonably attracted to, schoolboy level of attraction. So I confessed, all kinds of impure thoughts. I never really acted on it, but, impure thoughts to my confessor. And he said, the wages of sin are death. Do you understand that? He said, do you understand that the wages of sin is eternal death? And I was like, oh, wow. And I went, yeah. And he said, okay, when these thoughts come upon you, I want you to cross yourself and I want you to say the Our Father 12 times. Every time this happens. I'm like, okay. So a month goes by, I come back, to my confessor, and I say, wow, that completely worked. Is that like some secret prayer from the apostles, or what is that? And he goes, actually, I just wanted you to get your mind off of her. It was just a practical medicine.
Yep.
That the priest gave me. Put your mind on something wholesome and get your mind off of it. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I have found in my own life and with other people and with my own sons, when they're tempted to sinful behavior, the best medicine is usually simply to ignore it and move on. The more you focus on it, the worse it can get. That's not true for all cases, though.
Yeah.
You're right. If we take this metaphor of the church as a hospital, then we can all go and volunteer and be volunteer nurses.
That's right. We're once patients who are raised up. I refer to it not as just a hospital, but a teaching hospital. Yeah. That we go through and we receive healing ourselves, and that helps to equip us along with other equipping to be the next round of nurses and doctors.
Yeah. And if you think about the world, it's a fallen world. So it's full of people who are wounded. They've been in a war they don't even understand. They're like civilians in a war and they don't know who's fighting.
Right.
The deceiver has got them all confused. They've been damaged in their lives in ways that they don't really even comprehend yet. Until you're a Christian, you don't realize how damaged you were. Mm-hmm. And how, how narrow the entryway to heaven is and how far away you were. And, so you're going to find people who are, lying in a, an artillery, hole, injured, and you're going to have to help people. That the world makes total sense with that metaphor is what I'm saying.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Well, how does this, I'm just wondering, and I wondered this even before we met and started talking, but how has this situation with James and your ex-wife and all that's gone on here, has that, let me just back up and say it this way. I've said before that all of us experience sorrow, grief, obviously, sometimes trauma, and I feel like these different things that come along, whether it's a fairly mild temptation or something massive, crushing, that those are like wedges that either drive us, the wedge falls down, and it either drives us into isolation, drives us into sin, drives us away from God, and I feel like I believe that we have the ability to choose where that wedge falls, or it pushes us closer to the heart of God. It pushes us closer to community. And so I wonder, Jeff, with all that's been going on, that's talk about trauma, the last number of years, how has this, and maybe it's been kind of some ebb and flow, but how has this impacted your faith and your journey with your relationship with Jesus?
Well, it was a complete, shock. I mean, when you convert to Christianity, a lot of people have this idea of the church militant, the church triumphant,
Mm-hmm.
and in a sense, this is the expectation of the Pharisees and the Sadducees in a way.
Right. That Jesus was coming, and yep.
And he was going to be a warlord who was going to liberate them from the Romans and give them back their lands and restore their temple. And Jesus came back to give them an eternal kingdom. And they weren't prepared for that, for that knowledge. They weren't prepared for that. And I think a lot of Christians who, like me, who've converted especially, we don't fully grasp. I mean, I remember being told this. And I remember being blessed by the church to protect me from the deceiver. But, I was warned that as soon as I convert, that, there would be massive attacks on me. That
almost no one hears that message. That's a message we need to hear more.
I was like, I'm tough.
I know, but what I mean is almost no one is told that message these days, it seems like. Okay, so, yeah.
In Orthodoxy, it's required to tell.
Yes.
They have to tell you 3 times, actually. They have to tell you 3 times at 3 Sunday services before they let you come in, because it turns out, well, I can tell you that it is actually true.
Yes, you can.
So a massive demonic attack descended on me and my family and destroyed my family, essentially. But this is the same thing that happened to Christ. A catastrophe lands on Christ. He's crucified. They asked for Barabbas. They don't ask for him. His community didn't ask for him. They asked for Barabbas. He goes to Calvary. He's crucified. He descends into Hades. He harrows Hades and gives hope to all the souls for all eternity, for eternal life. And this kind of eternal victory is way greater than any kind of military victory that anybody could have brought, to the Sadducees or the Pharisees. And I think I think we're all crucified at some point. And the question is, if you look at an Orthodox cross, the footrest, you'll see that the one on the right is higher than the one on the left. And the reason it's crooked is because of the thief that went to heaven and the other thief that went to hell, right? And you're kind of given that choice. At some point, we're all put on the cross. And the question is, are you going to choose to go to heaven or go to hell? What will you choose? And the path, as the Didache says, the true path to life is very narrow, and the path to death is very wide and full of delicious fruits. And so you can indulge yourself and die. And that's the experience that I have had. And I can encapsulate it into a story. I was in a deposition. And opposing counsel was telling me all these horrible things that were going to happen to my son. They're going to remove his penis. He's just going to have a hole there. And, he's going to have a girl's voice. He'll never look like you again. And she was doing these things to get me to say intemperate things, that she could use against me at trial. And I realized at that moment that one of the best weapons I had against the enemy, and I mean the spiritual enemy, that was two things. One, calmness, the ability to just be calm and have a feeling but not act on it, and humility, because Satan can beat you. He's more tricky than you are. He's smarter than you are. He can garner other people's opinions against you better than you can ever convince them. But there's one thing Satan lacks that you have vastly more of, and that's humility. You can beat Satan with humility. And that was the insight I had in that moment, where I could be calm because I could be humble and know that I'm not really able to affect what's happening to me, but at some level, a spiritual level, I can't be touched. My son at some level can't be touched. His soul cannot be touched. And there were some things with my sons that also gave me a lot of confidence, hope. You always need hope. I'm a boxer. So the approach I took with my son is I didn't talk to him about any of this stuff, intellectual arguments or, stuff, all the stuff the therapists were doing, telling him he's a girl. I would just show him how great it was to be a man.
Yep. Right.
So we go hunting, we live outside. We're boys, we don't care if it's cold, hot, whatever. We just go outside. We'll just stay outside for 3 days and hunt. We do anything we want. We go swimming in creeks, So my boys like to come to the boxing gym with me, and a boxing gym is a highly masculine culture. And there were two events that happened there that have convinced me that I think my son got my values, and I don't think they can change that. I have one son, Jude, who had a little bit of cerebral palsy. Boxing actually cured it. Doing cross punching cured him of it.
Wow.
It took a couple of years, but he couldn't jump rope. He couldn't even do one jump rope. So, we do 10 minutes of jump rope before we train, So he's just there trying to do one for 10 minutes. Just can't get one, just doing one. This goes on for like a month. Then finally he gets one. And then a month goes by and finally he can jump twice. The entire boxing gym shut down when he got two. And these pro and semi-pro boxers came over to him and said, "Hey, we've been watching you. And you haven't given up. You've come in here for 10 minutes. Every workout, you try to jump that rope. And now we know that you can do it twice. We know you can do it for good. Now we know you're not a quitter and you're one of us, my friend." And they all welcomed him into the boxing gym. It's like, you're one of us because you don't quit. So that was a huge thing for my son. Okay.
Yep.
My son has never been so proud as that moment. And then they had never really seen a boxing match where two men are actually trying to put the hurt on one another. So I arranged an exhibition match, and I thought it was just going to be an amateur boxer like me, but the guy turned out to be this semi-pro guy, 6'5". And we're only going to do 3 rounds, 3-minute rounds. In the first round, this guy puts a world of hurt on me, man. He winds up getting a liver shot, and he just drops me and I thought, oh, great, my kids are going to see me get TKO'd in the first round, And so I'm on the ground. I'm trying to it's kind of involuntary when you get a liver shot. You can't uncurl from the fetal position. It's like a reflex action.
Yeah.
So it's not that you fall. You just curl in the fetal position. You can't get up. So my son, James, comes over and says, "Dad, it hurts just as bad on the ground as it does standing up. You might as well fight."
Wow.
And it made me laugh, and it made the referee laugh, and my opponent laughed. And so I got the longest 10 count in history. Then I got the longest standing 8 count in history. And then we finished the match. And I did a lot better afterwards. I think the guy took it easy on me.
Yeah.
And so I realized oh man, my boys have my values. I don't think she can run that out of them at a certain point. I mean, I think when you get that at that age and it expresses itself that way, I don't know that she can change it. So I've always had hope.
Yeah.
And so if I have hope and humility, I don't think the enemy can hurt me or hurt my boys.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's powerful. I mean, you sharing about those guys coming around. I just want to, the audience has heard a number of times my story of that stone of remembrance of my life of when in my mid 30s, for the first time ever, Christian men heard my story and gathered around me and welcomed me and told me they were glad that I was there and I belonged with them. Well, I'd never heard that, from any except the LGBT community, for all kinds of different reasons. And so that was the beginning really of what I often refer to within me, like that acorn of masculinity. You referenced it earlier, beginning that my dad didn't know how to activate, didn't know that there was a need to activate it. And really God used in my mid 30s, used this group of Christian guys who didn't have a clue of what they were doing, just, to begin to activate that seed of masculinity until it has grown into, I'm small in stature, but I love being a man. I mean, I hated that when I was young. And I feel like I fill it out, and there's, God works through my masculine soul and frame. And, in terms of being a spiritual father and a biological father and having something to give away to my wife, and that God created us to give away as men and as women, back again. So anyway, the beauty of God's design is just, in one way, it's so profoundly simple, and yet in another way, it's deeply profound and unsearchable and unscrutable. But the enemy, like you said, he does use deception. He doesn't. He can't control us, but there's a deception. If we believe what he's saying is true, then it's as good as if it is in terms of how we act. And but also he takes God's good and created order and turns it into chaos. And that's a lot of what obviously is being experienced here. Where do things, as we wrap up, Jeff, I just really appreciate, I was going to say James, that's your son's name, but as we wrap up,
it's a good name.
Yeah. What is kind of going on right now? I mean, what in terms of where you are and your boys, James in particular, the courts, I mean, all of that is, what can you share with us there?
So what happened was the liberal judge in Dallas County allowed my ex-wife to move my sons to California right after they passed the transgender kidnapping bill, SB 107.
Yep.
And so I went up to the Texas Supreme Court. The supposedly conservative justices allowed my son to move to California, full well knowing he was going to be chemically castrated. Right after the justice wrote the opinion, the governor of Texas promoted him to the chief justice. And the reason they did this was I'm a huge political problem in Texas for them. And I have been a thorn in their side for a long time. Okay. They got the case out of Texas. Now it's in California, and it's not a Texas case anymore. And it's out of there. It's not a thorn in their side anymore. And they were willing to sacrifice my son to do that. And they did, in fact, do that. So I go to California under Judge Mark Uhas. We have a trial. He denies me an independent medical exam, denies me an independent psychological exam, denies me all evidence from the other side. They didn't supply me one piece of paper, nothing. I had to provide full discovery. We go into trial. Unsurprisingly, he grants her full authority to castrate my son. He keeps me on supervised visitation, but now even phone calls have to be supervised. The problem with this is the supervisors are requiring me to use my son's girl's name and all sorts of things like that. So when this all began, I had three principles that I decided I was going to follow. Number one, I was never going to hurt my son. Number two, I was never going to morally miseducate my son. And number three, I was not going to let any of my resources go to hurt my son.
Yeah.
So those are the three principles I followed. So I can't do these supervised visitations if I'm having to teach him he's a girl by using his girl's name and female pronouns. I'm just not doing it. So the judge also actually put in the order. This is like pretty unusual. I've talked to a lot of California lawyers. They've never seen anything like it. She doesn't have to give my letters or birthday gifts or Christmas gifts to them. And she sends them all back. So they have no contact with me at this point. At a certain point during the trial, I received the medical records from Kaiser Permanente. These were not in discovery, but because they were entered in by an expert witness. In the medical records, these are quoted in the medical records. So they're direct quotes from a recording that was made, and they were transcribed into this record. The gender doctor asks my son, "Do you want to have children later in life?" And James says yes.
And he's how old again at this point?
12.
Okay.
It's very unusual for a boy to say yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that means he has a strong desire to have children. And again, keep in mind, this is in quotes. So this was told to my son. The gender doctor then says, when we remove your testicles, we can cut them open and harvest your sperm so that you can have a child later in life as a woman. So I read that, and I stopped paying child support at that point because I'm not going to give resources to hurt my son. The current court's point of view is that I have to pay for the chemical castration of my son as medical child support, and I'm not going to do that. So I'm looking at prison probably in the future. I don't know if it'll be in Texas or California, but it'll be probably for child support. I'm never paying child support again. And so that's kind of where we are. I'm going up on appeal right now because there were so many trial irregularities. The fact that I didn't get discovery, the fact that I was denied an independent medical exam, that the appellate court, if I make it into the appellate court, it will definitely have to overturn this. We'll have another trial. The appellate court has given me the runaround. So they know I live in Texas. So they're saying I can't electronically file everything. So I have to fly to Los Angeles and go to a physical window to file, which, makes it expensive and slow.
Right.
They're refusing to file paperwork when there was a word that was misspelled. It had two letters that were transposed, and they refused to accept the filing, even though the court rules are very clear that if you can tell what the word is, you're supposed to allow it. So they're just using any trick they can to keep me from filing. But I'm going to do it, and eventually I'll wind up at the California Supreme Court. And I will probably wind up in federal court eventually. I'm not going to stop fighting until my son's 18. And he's owed everything I have, and he's going to get that.
So at this point, did she follow through, and is that surgery done where he's castrated?
So she doesn't have to notify me of anything.
Okay.
But she specifically filed to put him on puberty blockers. So I believe in December he was put on puberty blockers.
Okay.
I don't know if he's gone on cross-sex hormones yet. I don't think he has.
Okay. Yep. I'm sure like myself, those listening or viewing this are heartbroken, Jeff, for you and for your son, really your sons. I mean, my guess is, but I'm going to ask you directly. I would think you probably would love to have full custody of your boys, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think if I just get them involved in being a man, they're just going to turn into normal guys.
Mm-hmm.
Fine,
Yep.
I know that James has already rejected a female identity. So one of the things that precipitated the move to California is he did an outcry to the court-appointed counselor and said, "I don't want to be a girl, and I'm embarrassed wearing dresses." And they threw him out of the office and initiated a CPS investigation against me for, quote, forcing him to be a boy. So he already was responding to just simply hanging out with guys and being a guy.
Yep.
So if I could just get 50-50 time with my son, he would reject a female identity.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I don't know. Have you had any, as we're going to wrap up here in just a minute, I keep saying that, but I don't mean to keep you on much longer. I'll be quick here. Okay. Have you had much personal interaction? Like I'm thinking of a friend of mine, someone who we've had on this podcast, who had actually in adult confusion, embraced this idea that he was in the wrong body, and he went down this whole pathway. He's had top and bottom surgery, was on cross-sex hormones for a long time, but really through God's intervention and an encounter with him, his eyes were completely open. He's like, what on earth have I done to myself? He's returned fully, but there's no fully bodily, but his soul, I mean, who he is, he's done everything he can to return back to how God created him. And he's fully embraced that again and is living out his life as a man. Have you had much interaction with guys like that?
Oh yeah, I know lots of detransitioners.
Yep. Okay.
And they've been very supportive.
Yep.
My sons have even met detransitioners, so 100%. And I know detransitioners that partake in the full life of the church.
Yep. Yeah,
no problem.
That's right. My friend does too. So, well, hey, Jeff, can I just, before we wrap up here, can we just pray for your situation? And I just want to invite anybody else. This is recorded, but as you're listening to this, viewing this, I just want to encourage you as we're going into prayer here. This will have already been prayed by us, but would you just join us in praying for Jeff and for his boys and for this whole situation, that God is not, his hand is not held back from being able to do what he desires to do. And we don't even know the complex ways in which, why God is holding back to this point in some ways, but I believe he has some powerful things down the road. So Jesus, we come to you and we ask you to move and intervene. I pray that you would sustain and even grow and deepen Jeff's faith in you and Jeff's relationship with you. And Father, we pray that you would break through. Thank you that Jesus, when you showed up after your resurrection to your disciples, you just stepped into the room, the doors were closed. You are not impeded in any way in coming into the life of these boys. And so would you do that? Would you be in their room, in their bedroom? Would you be in their life? Would you be walking with them and wooing them and drawing them into what's true and what's real in terms of who they are, but also who you are, and that they would come into full relationship with you, Lord? I pray that you would guide them and guide their steps, guide Jeff's steps. We pray for protection over them, and that you would also use this to enliven your church to recognize what is going on here more broadly, and to stand up not only, not just out of anger or rage or kind of grabbing things to getting on a platform and all of this, but Lord, that there would be real humility, first of our own sin, but secondly, that there would be equal parts compassion, but also equal parts truth, that your church would be revived and to stand in that place of leading by example, the way that you've called us to in the culture. And so would you just bless Jeff and his boys, I pray, and bring about something that, again, we cannot even imagine ourselves, but we know that you are not limited in bringing about incredibly wholesome things out of this brokenness. You do it all the time, Lord. You're fully able to do that. We just give this to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or view future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruithnetwork.com/podcast. You may also subscribe to Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Google Music. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a future episode.